Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of our look at the life of Grigori Rasputin, one of the most interesting and also consequential lives of the 20th century. If you did not see the first episode of this reaction, there's a link in the description that will take you back to that, as well as the link to the original content from the channel Extra History, who we are using for a launch of our discussion. Before I get into today's episode, real quickly, I want to let you know I am going to be doing some more videos talking about the situation in Ukraine. And with that in mind, my friend JD from the History Underground, who has one of the best historic-related channels on YouTube, and if you haven't already checked him out, definitely do so. If you're looking for content from historic sites, like the stuff I do, there's nobody who does it better than JD. But right now, he is over on the Poland-Ukraine border. JD is there with his son, who he adopted from Ukraine, from an orphanage there. So obviously they have a great deal of love for the people of Ukraine, and they wanted to do something to help. So they're over there on the border helping with the refugee crisis. If you follow, he's posted 4 videos updating and showing the situation. Definitely check those out. And while you're at it, if you have anything that you can spare and you want to find some way that you can do something to help the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding there with the millions of people who've been displaced from their homes, who've lost everything but what they could carry. JD has been making run after run after run to the store, buying all the suitcases that he can load up in his car, because a lot of these people are coming across, a lot of these are elderly people coming across holding things in grocery bags, and that's everything they have, and it's really difficult. And so just little things like having a suitcase to put what they have with them or what they're given at the border, because there's a lot of people helping out at the border giving them things, goes a long way. So my wife and I made a donation, and we're asking other people to consider doing the same thing. I'm going to put the link in the description to this video to JD's Patreon, or not Patreon, to his PayPal account, where you can make donations. I think last I checked, he had spent over $2,000 on suitcases and was still doing all he could. And I can vouch for him 110%. He's a good guy. Your money is going directly to the people who need it if you send it to him through PayPal. So I'll put that link in there. Check out his videos from the situation there. You won't regret it. Okay, let's dive into today's video.
Fall 1907, Peterhof Palace, St. Petersburg. Tsarevich Alexei, heir to the throne of Russia, lies contorted in pain. His leg has swollen to alarming levels. Black patches are under his eyes. He'd been playing in the park when he'd fallen, opening an internal hemorrhage in his leg. And while a nanny follows the young Tsarevich day and night to try and prevent him from injuring himself, the boy is 3 and doesn't always listen. This is the most closely guarded secret in Russia. The heir to the throne has hemophilia. When they cut his umbilical cord, it bled for 2 days. A bruise or cut that would be a comparatively minor injury for another child could kill him. His mother is distraught. Doctors can only give him aspirin, and he begs his mom to make the pain go away.
So a couple of things real quick there. The gene that causes hemophilia can be a genetic one, and it's known to have been carried by Queen Victoria and passed on to her descendants, which Alexandra, the Tsarina, who is Alexei's mother, is a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And so, and most of the European royal houses descend from Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria's eldest grandson is Kaiser Wilhelm II. Another one of her grandsons is King George V of England, and it goes through many of the houses. And so this is something we know took place. And you hear them mention there about how, he fell and got an internal hemorrhage in his leg. Most people think of hemophilia, oh man, if you get a cut and it'll keep bleeding. Well, no, a cut on the outside is a little easier to control because you can sew it up. You can deal with that. It's those internal injuries that are the problem. Hemophilia just means that your body doesn't have the ability to clot like normal people do. Normal person gets a cut, you'll bleed a little bit, but then your body will heal itself. It'll clot that so that you don't keep bleeding. This is the real fear, is an internal injury you don't see and you don't know about. Where your body might normally heal that on its own. In the case of Alexei, it doesn't. And you'll hear that the only thing the doctors are doing is treating him with aspirin. That's going to be a key, because a lot of the theories are that that's how Rasputin heals him, is he takes him off aspirin. Because what does aspirin do? It thins the blood. It makes it worse. A lot of people take low-dose aspirin because it helps with heart attacks, because it thins your blood. It makes it a little easier to deal with that, so the blockages aren't as severe.
So Alexandra sends a telegram. Find Rasputin. Thanks so much to HelloFresh for continuing to help us bring history to the table. If Rasputin had never come in contact with Nicholas and Alexandra, he would have remained a footnote in Russian history, an obscure figure known mostly to scholars of the late Romanov era. But in 1905, they had their first meeting with the Holy Man, as Nicholas called Rasputin in his diary. Soon, Rasputin was sending them letters full of encouragement and spiritual advice, and they kept meeting irregularly. Now, to understand why the royal couple liked Rasputin, you first need to understand the unique pressures that they were under. Pressures that were partially due to historical trends and circumstance, and partially of their own making. Nicholas and Alexandra were a rare thing in European royalty. A genuine love match.
That's true.
But they still had to overcome opposition from both families to get married. And for good reason. Because, oh boy, check out these red flags. Alexandra's grandmother, Queen Victoria, thought Russia was unstable. In 1881, revolutionaries had assassinated Nicholas's grandfather in a bomb attack, and she worried her granddaughter would be killed. After all, while Victoria liked Nicholas, he was an inflexible autocrat, meaning more conflict on the horizon.
And that's a fair concern, because there had been violence going on in Russia for the better part of a century at this point, pretty much going back to the Napoleonic era. You saw some pretty regular violence directed toward the royal family, directed toward the aristocracy, things like that. And it wasn't unique to there. I mean, the Kaiser of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Joseph, his wife was assassinated in the late 19th century, and there were other assassinations that took place at this point and later on. So this is an ongoing concern, especially in Eastern Europe.
Nicholas's parents, by contrast, disliked Alexandra because she was German, as anti-German sentiment was high in Russia and only got worse as the country approached World War I. Plus, there were doubts of Alexandra's fitness, since she had such severe social anxiety that she was known for freezing during piano recitals and not talking at parties. Relatable? Sure, but probably not the qualities you look for in an empress. And when they married, all those forces came together. Alexandra was intensely private, and at a time she needed to be making allies, she let few people get close to the imperial family.
And this was a problem for both Nicholas and Alexandra, is that they weren't bad people. In fact, quite the opposite. I think they were probably pretty decent human beings. They were very out of touch, or at least seemed out of touch. And part of that, as they mentioned here, has to do with personality. But it also is not a good look at a time when you've got people starving, people very poor, and they're looking to a absolute monarch for answers, for help. And the guy comes across anyway as not caring. He comes across as kind of a Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake, even though that never really happened. But that kind of attitude, which I think is probably unfair to them, but you can understand why it was seen that way.
Her stiffness at social events and awkwardness in public was misinterpreted as arrogance or disdain, meaning her absence from the social scene and apparent secretiveness opened the door for society gossips to pass off any rumor as genuine, such as that Alexandra was having a lesbian affair with her favorite maid of honor. And as these society rumors reached the couple, it fueled their us versus them mentality, made Alexandra even more private, and created a situation where they thought every rumor about their inner circle were also just vicious lies.
This is one of the reasons I really appreciate Extra History's look at history, because they analyze this stuff. And obviously there's a certain amount of opinion that goes into observing things like this, but I think it's a good one. I think it's an accurate look at the situation. Understanding the human psyche, understanding the social and mental aspect of all of this is really important to understanding these events. And I mention this all the time when I speak in schools to students, and we're talking about how people act the way that they do. And, there are a number of things that will cause a otherwise rational person to act very irrationally, but two of the most prominent are fear and your kids. Fear will cause people who are otherwise quite rational to do completely irrational things that from the outside you would look at that and think, why would you do that? Why would you act that way? Well, when you understand that fear is motivating it, here's an example, and I digress, but I hope this helps understand. We live in I wouldn't say an urban area, but we live in the suburbs, okay? We live in a town of 30,000 people. Within 20 minutes of my house, I can get to 6 different high schools. So we don't live in farmland. We don't live in the woods or in the mountains or anything like that. So occasionally you'll see a wild animal here and there, a deer or something nearby, but it's very rare that you see things like bears. Well, a couple of years ago, there was a black bear spotted in the parking lot at Walmart, which is like 3 miles from our house. But a half hour later, somebody posted a picture on social media that bear was in the township park. Well, if you look at a map, here is Walmart, and here is our house, and here is the park. And so I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking the bear's coming right toward our house. Now, I'm not rationally thinking, okay, the odds that it's going to show up in my yard are slim to none, and it's a black bear, so it's not even that harmful. If you scream at it, it'll probably run away. All I'm thinking is my 6-year-old son's playing in the backyard, and there's a bear headed this way. So I went outside, I screamed at him, and told him to get in the house. That was fear. Fear about something happening to my child. And that will cause you to do things you otherwise wouldn't do. So put yourself in their situation. There's increasing anger toward the royal family. They're hanging on by a thread anyway, and they've got a kid who at any moment could trip and die because of it. And he's the heir to the throne. All of this is the perfect storm for someone like Rasputin to take advantage of.
Remember that tidbit later. Things only got worse when Alexandra had 4 girls in a row. Healthy, wonderful kids, but none who could inherit the throne. In their desperation, the couple ended up turning to a French miracle worker who claimed Alexandra was pregnant with a boy. And they had so much confidence in this man, they even made an official announcement.
Ooh,
then months later, they found out Alexandra wasn't pregnant at all. And under pressure from advisors, Nicholas expelled the healer from Russia and issued an announcement of miscarriage. Then came Alexei in 1904 and his hemophilia. The next year, Russia lost a war to Japan, precipitating a revolution where Nicholas had to cede some of his autocratic power. This included a federal assembly and greater freedom of speech rights, meaning now newspapers could air their own criticisms of the imperial family.
So why does all this matter? Why is the heir such an important thing? You look throughout history, and very often, if there was not a strong male heir in position, it meant a much weaker situation for the monarch. A lot of times, until you had a son, until you had an heir, you felt threatened. You felt insecure on your throne. Even better if you had 2 heirs, an heir and a spare, as they called it. So this is a matter of national security for Nicholas. To have a son, but then once you find out that son's very weak and sickly and could possibly die, may never reach adulthood, you're still just as precarious.
So by the time Rasputin arrives, what we have is an isolated, deeply religious family set upon by every imaginable kind of pressure, from political to social to medical to celebrity, plus the very real fear of assassination.
Yep.
And their greatest hope for the future is an uncontrollable toddler who can die if he skins his knee.
All of that matters because all of that is why they're willing to turn to Rasputin. Take all that away, they probably don't do it. Or the first moment that it starts to look bad or damage their reputation, he's gone. Like the French guy. But when he comes along and he's able to make the situation better, of course they're going to turn to him. Of course they're going to trust him. Put yourself in that situation if you're a parent, if you're a mother or a father, if you're a monarch. In their situation, I think most people would have done what they did.
In other words, when Rasputin started meeting with the couple, he gave them something they truly needed. Hope.
Yep.
He told Nicholas that God supported him holding on to power. His magnetic but calming manner, and his assurances God would protect the family, also soothed Alexandra. And he spoke to them about the importance of love. Love of God, the family's love for each other, and the love of one's fellow Christians. But it got a level deeper in 1907, when Alexei fell and Alexandra called for Rasputin to come heal her boy. Rasputin arrived, prayed over the child's bed, and made the sign of the cross over him. Then he told little Alexei that his pain would go away, that God would heal him, and that he should get some sleep. Then he left, and Alexei got better. He fell asleep, and the hemorrhaging stopped. And by the next morning, he was sitting up, free from fever, and recovering. Now, how did that work, you might be asking? Well, historians have debated exactly why, short of divine intervention, that this would be the case. One theory is that Rasputin often threw out the doctors, who were giving Alexei blood-thinning aspirin as treatment. Another is that, perhaps purposely, Rasputin tended to show up just as bleeding episodes were ending, while still others say that Rasputin's presence simply calmed Alexandra, whose anxious behavior often scared Alexei, which led to increased blood pressure and further bleeding.
All of that could be true at the same time, or it could be any number of combinations of those things. But, we'll never know for sure.
Even Nicholas himself noticed how Rasputin helped Alexandra's anxiety. Once when the prime minister complained about Rasputin visiting the family, Nicholas reportedly said, "Better 10 Rasputins than one of the empress's hysterical fits." Rasputin increasingly visited the Romanovs in their private apartments, even being allowed to play with the children, pray with them at bedtime, and speak alone with Alexandra in her room. Now, this was extremely unusual for someone not in the family, particularly being around the girls in their nightdresses. But the Tsar and Tsarina were not alarmed, and other servants were present.
And again, as we mentioned in the last episode, things that you and I rationally would look at and say, that's not a good look. Boy, that looks bad. There's a lot of rumors that could surround things like that when you have enemies. You overlook that stuff because my son's getting better. If that means that I have to put up with some eccentricities, put up with things I wouldn't normally permit, my son's getting better. That's going to override all that stuff.
The children treated him sort of like a kind and fun uncle. Meanwhile, Rasputin was using his new legitimacy to move up in the world. He went back to Pokrovska with money, buying a bigger house, and showing the villagers a shirt Alexandra had sewn for him.
Proximity to power is attractive to people. It gets you into places you didn't otherwise get. I'm the guy who healed the future emperor of Russia. That goes a long way, and that'll get some things that Rasputin wants.
He also started bringing his followers around, almost all women, of both aristocratic and non-aristocratic status. He would give tours of the village, promoting the spirituality of the peasant lifestyle, have his followers stay at his house, and bathe with them at mixed-gender bathhouses.
Hey, at least he's bathing. Remember yesterday we talked about how he would wear the same shirt for like a year and a half. At least he's bathing.
Which was scandalous in high society, but common among peasants at the time. And that's when the investigation started. The priests of Pokrovska accused Rasputin of heresy, and both the Orthodox Church and Tsarist secret police began looking into Rasputin's connections to the Klistis and rumors he was sleeping with followers. Aristocratic gossip circulated that Rasputin was bathing with the children at night.
And it's not a huge leap then when these rumors start going around and stories start coming out about him doing these things. It doesn't take long before you're going to look at that and say, well, wait a second. If he does that with them, he's probably doing the same thing with Alexandra and with their girls and with people in the palace. And we can't allow that.
Sleeping with Alexandra and had impregnated Olga, the eldest Romanov child.
There you go.
Now, to anyone in the inner circle, these stories were patently and obviously false. But they also primed the royal family to dismiss more credible accusations, like that Rasputin had raped one of his female followers. Then the scandals reached another level, as Russia's newly emboldened press got wind of them.
There's a really good point to be made there, and that's, I think, an important lesson for us to learn today, is that when you constantly hurl accusations about a person, ridiculous accusations that have no basis in fact, and over and over again quickly get dismissed, it's the whole crying wolf thing. Then when something comes along that's actually credible, people are tone deaf to it. They've just, we've heard this over and over again. And so they just dismiss it, even though there might be reality to it. A great example of this, and I may step on some toes here and I may offend some people, but it's an example that I see a lot lately. There seems to be a really quick trigger when it comes to accusing people of racism in today's society. Racism is evil. I wish it didn't exist. I think it's awful. I think anytime we prejudge a person based on anything, based on their skin color, based on their social economic background, based on their ethnicity, based on what part of the world they come from, that's horrible and should never happen. But that word and that accusation gets thrown out there so much anymore that when it really happens, people are like, oh, come on. You know, you actually create the opposite effect. You create a kickback against it. And now when it really does happen, where it really does exist, people are like, oh, and they brush it aside and they ignore it because that's all they've heard all the time. And that's just one example. There are a lot of different ways that we do that. You know, throwing the term Nazi at people on the right wing, or throwing the term socialist or communist at people on the left. Those kinds of things, you throw them out there often enough, people just stop listening. And so all these accusations that were being made against Rasputin that had no basis in fact hid the fact that there really were some things going on that needed to be dealt with.
The stories of Rasputin became front-page news, even as former promoters turned on him. Theophan said the holy man had been corrupted by high society, and Hermogen had a revelation in prayer that Rasputin was a demon. In fact, of his church allies, only Iliador stuck by him. Though that wasn't really saying much, since by this point Iliador was way off the deep end. He'd begun claiming major government ministers were secretly Jewish Freemason socialists, started printing images of Jesus, but with Iliador's face, and barricaded himself in his monastery in a months-long police standoff.
Yeah, you're not going to have a lot of credibility on issues like Rasputin when you're kind of going down the same trails as him.
But Nicholas and Alexandra didn't budge. Even when the Minister of Internal Affairs came to the Tsar and shared the results of his investigation, claiming Rasputin was in fact a Kleist, the Tsar simply said that their contacts with Rasputin were a private matter, not one for the state. Things were getting hot, though, and this would have been the perfect moment for the Tsar to kick Rasputin to the curb and minimize impact on his family and the monarchy. Instead, they just told him to go away for a little while and sent him on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, not just helping him escape the limelight, but also to burnish his reputation as a devout man. It didn't work, because the Rasputin that now existed in the public imagination was neither the kind healer the Romanovs knew, or even the abusive manipulator some of his burned followers saw him to be. The public, you see, saw nothing but a sorcerer, a demon, an agent of the devil trying to make the royal family his puppets.
And that is not unique either. That's even in non-religious circles, that's something that was very common. You would have times in history where some advisor, some person close to the king was viewed as having some magical sorcery, witchcraft powers over the king, because why else would he listen to that person except that he's been bewitched and put under a spell somehow? People believed that throughout the centuries. That has been a common thing. And so while it was treason to go directly against the monarch, it wasn't necessarily treason to say, I'm loyal to the monarch, but that person he's got in a position of influence, it's got to go. He is the problem. And they would target that person, thinking that if they got rid of that person, it'll solve all the problems and everything will be okay. Because we all know Nicholas is a good guy and he just wants what's best for us, but we've got to get rid of Rasputin so that he can know what's best for us again. So yeah, he's going to become the target of anxiety in the empire. But by the time they get rid of Rasputin, the writing's on the wall. But we'll get into that. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. If you want to add something to the conversation, please do. And we'll see you again tomorrow with the next episode. Thanks for watching.